First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I know things get busy during the summer, and there's never a perfect time for anything, but I know that Dad would really appreciate you being here, and then, of course, the fact that K-Memory and the Gazette Online streaming this live so people that can't be here get a chance to participate, so really appreciate that. Also, I want to thank the Cedar Rapids Baseball Club and the staff here at the Cedar Rapids Colonels. What a tremendous job that they have done. A lot of preparation, what they've done with the video board and producing the program. We really appreciate all their support. It goes way back with the Brooks family as far as the Cedar Rapids Baseball Club, and Greg Cipher will talk about that a little bit later on, but really means a lot. I also want to take a minute and along with my mother, and thank Steve Rowe, who is the communications director for athletics at the University of Iowa. You know, it's a little bit of a different situation when you go through something like this, where you find out about a passing at maybe 4:30 in the afternoon, and you're at one of your son's high school baseball games, and by 7 o'clock that night, you're actually gets out. So he couldn't make it here tonight, but I really appreciate his professionalism, his help through the last month, and our continued friendship as well. The last month, obviously, has brought back a lot of great memories, and I really go back to not only Saturday night, June the 25th, but then the 3 or 4 days after that. I've really never had so much fun after a little while. Talking on the phone, listening to phone messages, returning texts, and just hearing a lot of great stories. And it really became a lot of fun hearing from everybody and what my dad meant to so many people, not only in the state of Iowa, but really throughout the country. And by Tuesday or Wednesday, doing some radio shows and hearing on television and talking to a lot of people, it brought a smile to my face every single day to be around that telephone so often. Thankfully, that's slowed down a little bit, but still a lot of nice thoughts have come in here the last 3 weeks. You know, we've all got great stories about him, and many will be talked about tonight, and I've heard a lot of great ones already this evening. But I was asked on a radio show, I think it was Monday, after his passing on Saturday night, well, what was it like growing up with Bob Brooks? And I kind of thought about it, and if I'd ever thought about it before, it hadn't been for a long time. So I kind of told him a couple of things that really stand out for me, and it was kind of the people you were around and the people that you met. You know, back in the 70s and the 80s, when, you know, coaches and players and back then than maybe they are today. And I was kind of going through in my mind some of the people that you meet. You might forget about it for a while. We'll never forget it. It's just something that really never leaves your mind. '80s. I've never seen two larger. Not only when he was the head coach, Ditka, you know, those names that you really remember as a kid. And then I got to think, you guys go on Chicago, that was and what you kind of, whether you with him in a house able for so long, we were going to take a trip just we were spring break. So we're driving somewhere in Missouri back in the mid-'80s, and we've got some Missouri radio station on, and we're just listening to some talk radio. And all of a sudden it comes on the air that George Raveling, the head basketball coach at the University of Iowa, is going to resign, has resigned. Okay. Well, we kind of look at each other and boy, that's kind of out of the blue. So we keep driving and all of a sudden it's just kind of silent in the car. And I kind of feel like we're going a little faster than we probably should and starting to slam on the brakes, and he's starting to look around a little bit more than usual. So I looked over and he kind of looked at me and he just pulled off on this exit. And we're really not near any type of city. And there's this abandoned gas station off in the distance, and we pull in, and I mean there couldn't have been more than 2 people there. 1985 payphone era, right? No cell phones, no nothing. And I finally started to realize, well, he wants to call back to KHK Radio, who we worked for, and get on the air with this news. I figured we were on spring break, somebody else can handle that, not a problem. So we go around this abandoned gas station, and you know, there's weeds growing up the side of it, so there's hardly anybody there. No payphone. So we hustle back in the car and get back on the highway. Next exit, we pull in, not much there. Well, he sees a Dairy Queen. Right now, not private at all. 15 people deep, waiting to order. Right now, big news, George Raveling just resigned. Just instantly turn and look at him. And these people are starting to elbow the person and say, well, what's... These people could hardly order going on, but that was him. The Iowa City West. They're roll through your mind, but years did many of you do too. I mean, we would sign up, do that tonight right over here. The line would Mr. Bill Quimby.
Honored to be here. Thank you, Rob. Love to both of you. Tonight we're celebrating Bob's life. Interview. We're going to the time he was really professionally employed at KCRG. And I thought, Bob Brooks did so much to get things done the right way on the radio and the TV. So I hope that if there's many athletes here, coaches, or just fans, because you listen. I used to listen. I can remember I listened to WSUI when I was still in high school. But Bob Brooks, he's doing Iowa football. Bob Brooks is doing Iowa basketball. 1945, I believe. Big Ten champions. Murray Ware, Dick Ives, those people. So what I'm just saying, we owe Bob a great deal of thanks. I'm just going to say a few more words. I met Bob Brooks in 1944. I was a 7th grader, Bob was a 12th grader. He was kind of a celebrity at Franklin High School. Not kind of, he was. I can remember the school. He was doing broadcasting for Iowa football, Iowa basketball with WSUI, and he's only in high school. He started in 43. That's remarkable. He came to Cedar Rapids in 1948, got his first professional job with KCRG, and that started in July. And our team, the Cedar Rapids Legion team, we were in the state finals about the last week of July. Bob was in Mason City doing his first play-by-play on the job, getting a paycheck from KCRG. I'll never forget Bob Brooks in Mason City. And the other thing, of all the high school and collegiate athletes who have been interviewed by Bob, it was a thrill. If you knew Bob Brooks wanted to talk to you, you were really at the top of the hill, because he, Bob Brooks, was giving you a chance to talk on the radio or television. A couple other things that Bob has all kinds of honors, Hall of Fame, of the Collegiate Athletic Football Hall of Fame. That's a big honor. But a couple things I want to bring out that maybe we've forgotten. He was 10 times the state of Iowa's top broadcaster in the field of sports. He also did a number of things for the community. A lot of you didn't know Bob served on the City Planning Commission for a number of years, appointed by our mayor, and made a lot of helpful decisions to help plan for our city. He was on many boards. I can remember when he was on the Kid League board, he was on the M&J League, the old pro, semi-pro. He was president of the league for a number of years. It used to play at Daniels. He's helped on the Greater Cedar Rapids Open. He was on the directors of the Rebounders. Maybe you don't remember when they brought in the Collegiate All-Stars for about 3 years. And Bobby Knight and Dick Enberg, they were kind of the coaches, and Bob Brooks with a group of about 4 other men in our community were the committee that did all that. I would just like to say I am a privileged person to have known Bob Brooks. I think it's about 72 years. We used to talk on the phone about every week. Bob would call me, or I'd call him. I'd say, Bob, you screwed up on your report. It didn't end up like you said it did. And he said, oh, really? No. But Bob Brooks was a personal friend. Susie's a very personal friend. We love him. He's in heaven now, and we're the lucky ones on earth that knew him and listened to his broadcasts. Thank you very much.
Rob just said, people know who you are, so I don't have to introduce myself. I'm Gonder, sportscaster. I like to tell stories, kind of the essence of Bob Brooks. The first story involves when I first got to know him. I came to the Midwest, and in my early time here, I was doing Northwestern football and basketball, and got to shake Bob's hand when Northwestern played Iowa, so got to just say hello to him. Then I moved on to Illinois, and same thing, just knew him casually. Would talk, as the sportscasters do, talk to one another about, what was going on with your team, and an injury or whatever. Then from there, Pat and I moved to Des Moines, and the particular part of the story is that in 1968, I went to Ann Arbor. I was working for KRNT in Des Moines, and I went to Ann Arbor to broadcast a basketball game, Iowa game. And I got to the arena a little late. I wasn't traveling with the team or staying in the team hotel. I was really by myself, and the cab had let me down and got me to the arena late. And so when I arrived at the arena, though, the station had made arrangements to have an engineer and equipment there to pick up the broadcast, and they weren't there. The engineer wasn't there, no equipment, and it was pretty late, to try to scramble around and try and find out, what I could get. And Bob had the broadcast location next to mine, and when he saw my quandary, he offered me his backup amplifier and a microphone to get through the broadcast. The people at Michigan found me a technician who happened to be there that night, one of their employees who knew a little bit about radio. He got me checked through, got me on the air, I did the game, and Bob saved the broadcast. So I got to know Bob Brooks that day. To pay him back a little bit, when he and Susie came to Des Moines to cover the boys' state basketball tournament, Pat and I took the Brooks out to dinner one night as a small thank you for what he had done for me. And so then I really got to know Bob Brooks. After that, about a year after that, I came to Cedar Rapids, and then our association really started as we traveled on airplanes together and motor coaches and ate meals together and spent all kinds of time together in airports and hotel lobbies and became friends. But I never had a chance to pay him back for what he did until in one small way, one night at Carver Hawkeye Arena, probably 20 years after that time, we'd both come back from the post-game rooms and gathering our interviews with the players and the coaches and so forth. And I was sitting down getting ready to go on the air with my post-game, and Bob came over to me and said, "Ron, my tape recorder has malfunctioned. I don't have anything from the post-game room. Could I, maybe after you're finished, could I have some of yours?" And so I did. I hustled through my post-game and got Bob the tapes, and afterwards said, "Well, Bob, I didn't save a whole day for you, but at least 20 years later, I got to pay you back just a little bit, just a very little bit." My other story involves Bob and I when we were doing the basketball pregame for the Learfield Network. Those first 3 years when we were with Gary on the broadcast, and Bob and I, just the two of us, did a basketball pregame. And this particular game, we were at Kansas, and we were into the game now, and the game was going on. And one of the Kansas players chased a basketball toward us, and in his effort to get the ball, came right over the top of Bob and I, and just absolutely flattened us. I mean, just bent the chairs up, the metal chairs we had, landed on top of us. I mean, it was really a collision. John Streif, who's here tonight, and you'll hear, came over and said, "Thanks, guys, you took one for the team." Well, we really did. And after they went and got us two new chairs, the people there, the security people, and after we got ourselves straightened up and we're sitting back up again, Bob said to me, what is that black mark on your face? And I said, "I don't know. What do you mean? Describe it." And he said, "Well, it's a big black mark and it runs from about here to here." And I said, I don't know. I have no idea. So a few minutes went by, and I thought about it, and I said, "Bob, what color is your pen? Is it the same color as your pen?" Sure enough, in the collision, Bob had thrown his arm up and stroked it across my cheek, which I didn't even feel because of the collision. And I went ahead and and didn't wash it off the next day and wore it out to the station, and we had a little fun with it. But there's an after part of the story. A few days later, Bob was hospitalized, and the theory was that the bruises that he got from the collision caused a blood clot. And so he had to be hospitalized, and he was hospitalized at Mercy Hospital and told that he couldn't get out of bed because they didn't want the clots to move until they could dissolve them. And we had a game coming up, and so Bob was going to miss the game. He wasn't going to be on the pregame with me. But that morning, Bob called and he said, "Ronnie, I'm going to be with you tonight." And I said, "Oh, really? I thought they didn't want you to move." He said, "No, I'm going to be with you from right here in my hospital studio." And sure enough, he was. And that's the way we did the pregame. Bob was at Mercy Hospital, and I was at Carver Hawkeye Arena. And we had a lot of fun with it. He kidded about his studio hospital room and the attractive nurse who was better looking. It was his producer that night who was better looking than Jerry Full, our real producer. And so it turned out to be a fun situation, and the clot did dissolve, and Bob was okay. I would say that if I'm asked what the most memorable thing to me is about Bob and what I will miss the most it is his perspective and the perspective, the different kinds of perspectives that he had on the things that we talked about. You can imagine in being together for 31 years in all kinds of situations. I used to kid during the basketball season, that I had more, as I said, more meals with Bob Brooks than I do with my family, and I think I did, really at that, probably those times. But whatever we talked about, and we usually were talking about Iowa sport or a team or a game or whatever, and he so often would have a different slant on it than I had thought of, a different perspective, and I would go away from that time thinking, yeah, gee, I didn't think of it that way. And that was the way right up until he passed away. We still had periodic lunches, and I would ask him, his perspective on this or that, and it was always the same. So that is the thing that I will miss about my friend Bob Brooks. In closing, Pat and I and the Gonder family pass along our sympathies to the Brooks family, to Susie and Rob and Sue, and to Peter and Blair. And I thank you very much for asking me to be a part of this program. It's been very, very nice. Thank you. Thank you all.
They all know Ron, they might not know me. Hi, I'm Bill Happel. First, I want to say I think this is only something Bob Brooks could bring together, the cross-section of people that I talked to up there and see in the audience. High school coaches from across the city of Cedar Rapids, and administrators, principals, media people from all areas, Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, and of course, the University of Iowa people here that really, span the generations. I saw Jerry Hilgenberg up there, and only someone that's worked that long can look up there, and I see Bump Elliott and Tim Dwight sitting right next to each other, and that spans a lot of years of Iowa football. So I was going to start my speech with a "How you doing, everybody?" but I'm not a very good impersonator, and I certainly can't come close to the voice of Bob Brooks. But I'd like to thank Susie and Rob and Sue and Peter and Blair for inviting me to speak. I am honored to do so tonight. And I think they asked me to speak because my life intersected with Bob's in so many different ways and at so many different times. We all knew Bob as a legendary broadcaster, but I first knew Bob as a friend of my family's. He was a longtime friend of my father's and my mother's. And then after that, being a family friend, I knew him as a high school athlete here in Cedar Rapids, then as a University of Iowa athlete, and then as a coworker for 3 years, and I use that coworker term very loosely if you ever heard me behind the microphone. But he was always a good friend of mine personally. First, Bob and Susie, as I mentioned, have been friends of the family since before I was even born. My Uncle John was a teammate of Bill Quimby's, and Bob broadcast their games over at Hill Park at Roosevelt High School. And then Bob broadcast the first game over here at Kingston Stadium. My father was in that game for McKinley, and my mother reminded me that she was a cheerleader for Franklin. So Bob covered all those games for our family. And Bob remained a lifelong friend of my father's. As a matter of fact, he was the last friend to see him before he passed away a couple years ago. So our family's also been very blessed and very happy to share the last several Thanksgivings with Bob and Susie. I obviously knew Bob because of my friendship with my father, but like thousands of other Eastern Iowa high school athletes, I was very fortunate to be able to be interviewed as a high school student athlete by Bob Brooks. And it was always the thing that we waited, whether football, basketball, whatever, after the game, the coach came and talked, and then he'd give out the 2 or 3 names that Mr. Brooks wanted to see. And so we'd go back out across and get up to the press box, or at the old Washington High School gymnasium. I see Coach King's here. We'd climb up that ladder to get in that little box they called a press box at the old gymnasium. I'm still not really sure how Bob got up there. But for thousands of high school kids, Bob did give them their first interview. And I was sharing these memories with an old teammate of mine a few weeks ago, Maxwell Grant. And Maxwell recalled that Bob did give him his first interview, and he told me that it was the only interview he ever gave. And Max was an O-lineman, so that kind of tells you why he never got any more interviews. But it also says a lot about Bob that he called up an O-lineman in a high school game to interview. So not many kids that got that opportunity. But the impact Bob had on so many high school athletes, he spread that proverbial 15 seconds of fame across the thousands of kids. After high school, I'd like to say that Bob followed me to the University of Iowa, but he'd already been there for 40 years, so I guess he got there first. Being from Cedar Rapids and also a family friend, I probably did get a little more coverage than I deserved when I was down at Iowa. But it was still a treat, even when I was at Iowa, to be asked to get interviewed by Bob Brooks. I remember, Bob would really force you to talk sometimes because he didn't always come at you with a question. Sometimes it was just a statement. He'd say something like, "The offensive line blocked good today," and give you the mic, or "You had 9 catches today." So it really forced from the typical yes and no answers you hear lots of times from athletes, and that's what Bob kind of created. After Iowa, Bob asked if I wanted to do the color commentary for Iowa football games with him, as well as with Larry Morgan from Des Moines. And it was more than a little intimidating at first because I didn't have any broadcasting experience. I just finished playing football, and I really didn't know what went on up there during games. But it was really, I guess, intimidating simply because here's a legend, and Larry Morgan's here tonight. He's a true professional in his own right. It was really an honor and really to watch Bob and all the preparation that he went through to get ready for the games. He always wanted to be perfectly ready, know all the games, had the spreadsheets with the names on them, and he would also, hear him testing that gravel voice out before the game, singing "Bear Down, Chicago Bears." And that's how he'd warm up his voice, at least as I recall. And then 5 seconds later, we'd go on the air. And so that was always a treat. But after the games, he'd send me down to the visitors' locker room to get interviews. And again, I got no experience. But I really took it seriously. I really wanted to get some good stuff to take up to Bob for the post game because it meant a lot to me not to let him down. And I don't know how good I was as a commentator, but he always made me feel like I did a great job, and I always appreciate that from Bob. Back then, we were one of 5 broadcasts covering Iowa football. Addition to Bob, there was, of course, Ron Gonder, Jim Zabel, Frosty Mitchell, and Gene Clausen. I'm not sure if I left out someone, if I got them all. And the thing that I noticed is they all seem to get along so well. And even though they're competitors, they seem to really respect each other a great deal. And in particular, Ron and Bob were technically competitors in the same market here in eastern Iowa. But I never witnessed Ron or Bob treat each other in any other way than with respect and as good friends and compatriots. Ron and Bob shared a small plane when traveling to away football games, and it was truly a treat for me to listen to the stories and memories of 2 legends that we have here in eastern Iowa and that we have been very fortunate to listen to for all those years. As far as covering University of Iowa athletics, I mentioned Zabel and Ron and Frosty and Clausen, but there's also Dolphin, Podolak, Tate Cummins, Gus Schrader, Al Grady, and many, many, many more. But none of them covered the Hawkeyes for 73 years. And if you think of that, Bob Brooks got up, went to work every day for 73 years. So on behalf of all Eastern Iowa high school athletes, all former University of Iowa athletes, and everyone in the media, our family, and of course, all friends of Bob Brooks, I want to thank Bob for lifting us up and making us feel special, if only sometimes for 15 seconds. But I hope we can all live our lives like you did, Bob, and that we can get up, grab our tape recorder, put on our fedora, and go to work with the same passion that you did literally every day till the end. Rest in peace, Bob. Thank you.
I'm John Streif, the former athletic trainer and travel coordinator with the university, and it's a true honor to be asked by Susie and Rob and the family to be here and to say a few words today. A lot of you people in attendance were touched by Bob just as much as I and could be here doing this. I was so impressed after his death on social media how quickly things spread. And it's one thing, I think, to have the professionals and his peers write and talk about him. And there were some wonderful, wonderful things that you all read. But I think the thing that Bob would have enjoyed the most, and as I've told Susie, was the absolutely amazing response from the student athletes that he had worked with and he had interviewed over the years. I don't know if some of you people got to read those, but it was touching. And like I say, many people could be up here. One thing about Bob, he was filled with history. And we're going to miss that so very, very much. But not only filled with history, he wanted to know about you. And he wanted to know about your family. And I don't care if it was the camera crew or the sound crew or his caregivers, the people that traveled with us in the football program. He took time for them. Yes, he wanted to share the history of Iowa athletics and high school here, but he also wanted to know about you personally in your life. And I think that's what made Bob so very, very special. And because of that, there's many people in attendance, and I applaud you all for coming. To be honest with you, there's a nice breeze down here, and I think you're getting nothing up there. But we're really quite comfortable, thank you. I should never mention names because everybody in this place was impacted. But I have to mention two people. There's a gentleman that does the sideline phones for Iowa now named Jerry Rundle, and he's in attendance tonight. And this last year, Jerry Rundle went to Bob's house and picked him up for every flight with the Iowa football team and brought him back. And that's what type of man Bob was. You wouldn't do that unless he made an impact. Another guy, and I shouldn't mention names, is Jerry Palmer. And I think Jerry Palmer was instrumental in probably the video that you are going to see or have seen. Jerry was a video guy. He couldn't be here tonight. He's in Canada fishing, and he had told me that at 5 o'clock, he's going to go in the middle of the lake in a boat by himself and have a martini for Bob. It was very meaningful for him. I think Bob is the only one. Jerry was special, and there's many of you in attendance could say the same things, but Jerry did a lot of filming for Bob, as well as maybe when we had a press conference in the Carver and he had to go over to the practice field, Jerry would try to make sure that there was a golf cart there ready for Bob to get moved over. Not many people would go above and beyond like that. So I need to commend those two, as well as all of you people. I think I'm probably wrong about this, but I think Bob Brooks is the only person in Iowa history that attended all 6 Iowa Rose Bowls. That is an amazing accomplishment. And I got to tell you, this last year, I was fortunate to be there with a fan group and to run into Bob and Susie. He'd had a little accident out there. But when he got off the bus at the Rose Bowl with the team, he didn't ask for it. Susie didn't ask for it. I don't think the University of Iowa had anything to do with it. But to show you what first class Rose Bowl is, they saw Bob and they took him under his wing and they provided him a driver. They got to every function. He got a key to the city. He met the Queen. I mean, he felt like royalty. It was very special. I think Susie and Bob will never, ever forget it. And I only wish Coach Ferentz was here. I know Bob was excited about returning to the Rose Bowl this next year and getting treated the same way. I started at Iowa as a student under Ray Nagel in 1966. And I still remember the day. I was an Iowa farm boy, and I was in awe. One of my first games, see him walking across the field. Bob Brooks, Jim Zabel, Tate Cummings, that crew walking across to the media room that Eric Wilson had organized and put together. And I was just a youngster, and I was so in awe. Bob was a fighter. He didn't want to give up. He spent many times in the hospital, and Susie was so dedicated and by his side the whole time. It was something to see. But he wanted to share his history and his knowledge. The Friday, Saturday, and Sunday prior to his getting out of the hospital on that Tuesday, I was fortunate on Friday, Gary Hughes from Iowa City was leaving town and wanted to go see Bob. And we went up, and I think for an hour and a half, maybe more, Bob just unloaded and kept coming with history in Cedar Rapids and what was going on. It was amazing. And then I spent short times with him on Saturday and Sunday before I get out of the hospital on Tuesday, and that was a great, great honor for me. Bob knew I loved the Cedar Rapids Country Club, so he often invited me there for lunch. And be assured, those were long lunches. I got a lot of history, and I enjoyed every one. But he would never fail to tell me about Blair and Peter, his grandsons, and what they were doing. That meant a lot to him. He was special. And you guys were so special to him. Don't ever forget that, and I know you won't. He lived for those moments to share in your life and to watch you grow. Thank you. The last 3 years since I've retired, I've been walking through the press packs, shaking hands and holding babies and stuff, and it's just what I do. But I'd always stop by Bob's seat just to say hello, and I'll miss that so much this year. But Bob would always go down about the fourth quarter and start making his way down to the field. And then he'd come and stand along the sideline. And as you know, Iowa sidelines weren't very deep. And he'd always be very careful. But towards Brandon Sheriff's senior season, he came off the field and put a tremendous hit on Bob Brooks. I mean, I don't know how Bob survived it, but he was a fighter, and he did. And to this day, I told Bob, and I tell Brandon Sheriff, that he would have never won the Outland Trophy without that hit he put on Bob Brooks. Never. Bob, you're a true professional and a great friend. Thank you very much.
My name is Peter Brooks, and Bob was my grandfather. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for the support we've gotten through this. It really goes to show how great of a community we have and how much my grandfather was loved. It's really amazing to hear all these great gentlemen come up here and tell stories about my grandfather. Right after he passed away, it was awesome to hear all the stories that you all had to share. One of my favorite stories is when I was a young kid, and I never wanted to go to the grocery store with him because it would take 2 hours to get out of there. But what really impressed me with him, he's most known for his voice, but one thing I noticed about him was the way that he listened. When we were in those grocery stores, even as a young kid, I'd always notice people come up to him, want to shake his hand and talk to him. And as a young kid, I never understood why. Why did people want to talk to my grandfather so badly? Why were they so happy when walking away from him? I didn't really realize what a legend he was until I was about 14 years old. That just goes to show how humble he was. But really touches me that he was always in the stands when I was playing my games. He was always in the stands when Blair was playing. And one day he told me that one of his favorite spots was watching me play and my brother play. That's up there with Kinnick Stadium too. But it's amazing to think about how much I've learned from just watching him or speaking with him. I love hearing the stories about how much a simple conversation influenced so many lives. He's the perfect role model for me and my brother, and he's the person I strive to be one day. Thank you.
Eddie Podolak really wanted to be here tonight. I had a chance to talk to him on the phone last night. He's out of the country right now, but he did send me some words to share with you here tonight. I met Bob Brooks during spring football my freshman year at Iowa in 1966. He was a regular at practice and, of course, in the stadiums on Saturday. We became friends. Golf was a new sport to me, but Bob was accomplished, and in the summer of 1969, he was helping me with my game at the Cedar Rapids Country Club when my agent called and said that he had agreed to a contract with the Kansas City Chiefs. I left after 9 holes, and Bob told me to buy a suit, and I left for Kansas City. Fast forward 13 years, and I returned to the Hawkeyes as a radio announcer. Bob Brooks was in the booth when I got back. Our friendship continued for another 34 years. We had dinner almost every Friday and Saturday night on road trips, and I learned more about the world of sports from Bob than anyone else. I will surely miss his friendship and his sports knowledge, and he will never be forgotten by the Hawkeye sports family. Sincerely, Ed Podolak. Let's bring up to the podium Gary Dolphin.
How you doing, everybody? The afternoon highlights in the world of sports. I always wanted to impress Bob with my imitation of him. He and Johnny Orr and John Wayne were the three voices I had to work on the most when I would get goofy like that. But there's something to be said. We revere those we imitate. And Bob was a broadcast hero, but a great friend to me. You think about it for a moment. Billy mentioned that. You get to do something you love for the better part of 7 decades. Yet Bob's passion and his professionalism and his fairness in covering the Iowa Hawkeyes was unmatched, I feel anyway. When you analyze his career, as I have done time and time again, to me it's absolutely stunning. Brooksy called the Hawks' lone national championship football season, 1959. That revered Rose Bowl team of the beloved Randy Duncan and Bob Jeter, and on. Iowa finished number 1 that year, won the Grantland Rice Bowl trophy. And I forget who said it, but you're right. Brooksy not only covered all 6 Rose Bowls, but you think about this. He covered every bowl game that Iowa ever played in. And I think the record is 26, 24, and 1, something like that. Roughly 50 bowl games, somewhere in that neighborhood. 6 Rose granddaddies, and I can attest how happy he was this past January 1st. Score, outcome, didn't matter to Bob Brooks. And there's that deep resonating voice that painted the picture of 3 Iowa Final Fours. From the fabulous few, back-to-back in the 50s, with Bill Logan and Sharm Sherman and Carl Kane and all those great All-Americans, to Lute Olson's special rendition in 1980. You think about the players he covered, Murray Weir to Don Nelson, Ronnie Lester to Chris Street, Andre Woolridge, Aaron White, and oh yes, fellow Cedar Rapidian, Jared Utoff. Think of what Bob Brooks' eyes witnessed and then was able to describe to countless thousands of listeners around this part of the country. You know, and I'm honored to be here tonight, particularly in this stadium, because I know how much he loved this stadium and this community's rich minor league baseball tradition. Bob Brooks helped save baseball here in Cedar Rapids and the Midwest League, and we're all blessed for that. It was evident about his passion for that stadium next door, Kingston Stadium. That was equally precious to Bob, and that's where I first made his acquaintance, 1972, 73. I'm 21 years old. I'm trying to, my young broadcasting career is trying to find some traction, and I'm out of Dubuque, and I'm calling Mississippi Valley Conference games, and I'm coming down here, and Bob had come up to Dalzell Field, and we'd call Dubuque versus Cedar Rapids games, and I cherish those because not only that's the period we became great friends, but he also became a wonderful mentor to me. And here we are, thousands upon thousands of high school basketball, football, baseball, softball games later over KCRG and K-Hawk and K-Memory. And yet he never changed. He gave every team and every kid the most optimistic description, win or lose. It didn't matter to him. That was his style. He always found the good. He always found the silver lining in victory or defeat. And as Billy mentioned, their 15 seconds of fame or 20 seconds or 1 hour is pretty special. Excuse me. My other passion besides the Hawkeyes and this part of the state is history, and American history in particular. I'm a passionate follower of American history. I, in particular, have a great affinity for people that grew up during the Depression, as Bob Brooks did. He was one of those. And when I write my book, I'm going to have a couple chapters on Bob because he told me so many great stories. But perhaps my all-time favorite, we were talking about Niall Kinnick one day, and he goes, "Listen, Buster, let me tell you something about Niall Kinnick." 1937, 1938, he would mow lawns all week long in this community. Now remember, it was a push mower, and he'd make 25 cents a week, as I remember him telling me. And that was enough, come fall, to buy a 15-cent train ticket from here to the front door of Kinnick Stadium, and he had 10 cents left over to buy a knothole section ticket in the north end zone because he wanted to watch his hero, Niall Kinnick, run up and down the hash marks at then old Iowa Stadium. What a brief moment in history, but what a great story. And now Bob Brooks is a component of our great American history. It's not often that you can include, at least in my view, you cannot include Hall of Fame, legend, and class act in the same sentence. But Bob Brooks fits that description so well. He didn't get red-faced very often, but I used to tell him, you know, Bob, you may not, this was right after his Hall of Fame induction in 2004 to the College Football Hall of Fame. Bob, you got to understand, and he was so modest. I said, Bob, you got to understand something. You are our Vin Scully. You are our Dick Enberg. You're our Red Barber. You're our Mel Allen. I always thought he could have been a great United States Senator or a congressman. When you think about, could you see him walking down the hall with that arm out in front of him? And he'd have been a great politician if there is such a thing. Thank God this event is this night. I don't have to watch that convention last week or this week. Yet for all of his accomplishments and awards, ladies and gentlemen, Bob was a guy who persevered because of his passion for sports and kids and athletics in general. He knew they were the great escape for him. They were a break from any heartache or pain that he was enduring in his lifetime at whatever moment. Hard times, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What I'm going to miss the most, though, about Bob Brooks, you've heard about our Friday road trips. Podolak and I, and Podolak would echo this, what I'm going to miss most is unable to pick up the bar tab and the dinner bill for Bob Brooks. Podolak and I had a secret pact. Bob never paid when he was with us. And he knew what was going on, but we just enjoyed listening to Bob Brooks talk about Iowa, talk about Cedar Rapids, talk about Eastern Iowa, talk about baseball, talk about high school athletics. He and Zabel used to kid Podolak and I. They wallpapered their new homes with our receipts. And I'm only too happy to provide a small share of his house building. You know, this is the closest thing I have to a fedora. Brooksy, tip of the fedora to you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. I'm Phil Haddy, fellow City Rapidian, and I don't know how to say it, very close friend of Bob Brooks. And it's been used already a couple times, but how you doing, everybody? Here are today's highlights in the world of sports. That's the intro that Bob Brooks had given us for over 70 years. That was the intro of the man all of us came here to love and recognize today. it came from one who was truly, truly one of our own. Never has the saying, "You don't know what you've got until it's gone," been more apropos than it is with the loss of Bob. He truly was, and always will be, a treasure to Cedar Rapids and all of us who knew him. He's certainly the centerpiece of the crown jewels of this city. Sometimes I get a little, melodramatic about this, but I felt that way about Bob Brooks and the way he was to Cedar Rapids. And he was that way almost to a fault, was his loyalty to Cedar Rapids and the Colonels, Cedar Rapids minor league franchise, and the Iowa Hawkeyes. A lot of people don't know it, but he had numerous chances to take his talents to a higher level, to a much larger city. He could have possibly become the voice of a major league baseball team. That's how good he was. But he chose to stay in Cedar Rapids. He truly loved this minor league franchise, prep sports in this city, and the athletes it produced. A lot of people don't know it, but his father was on the board of directors of the Cedar Rapids minor league franchise. Bob was on the board of directors, and now fittingly, Rob Brooks is on the board of directors. There's a pretty good reason why we have such a crowd to honor Bob today. It's not only because of his broadcasting talent, obviously, it's because Bob was such a good man. I never saw him act in an unfriendly manner to anyone. He treated what some people would consider the bottom person on a totem pole the same as he did congressmen, governors, and even head football coaches. From a personal point of view, I think I'm very qualified to talk about Elder Brooks, as we so often called him when Rob and I were together. You see, he was one of the most influential people in every stage of my career. When I was 14 years old attending McKinley Junior High School, many people think it was a senior high school back then, but it was junior high here in Cedar Rapids. And Bob went and spoke to Gus Schrader. He said, "Can you give this guy a job?" I was about 14 years old. He wants to learn how to write a little. And I would write just little 2- and 3-paragraph stories about results of McKinley Junior High football and basketball. And all of a sudden, Gus would put them in there, and just for 2 little paragraphs, he would put a little, there weren't that many of them, but by Phil Haddy. That made me feel on top of the world, and that was because of Bob Brooks. He and I remained friends, and he was very instrumental in my being hired as a news reporter at KCRG TV and radio in the late 60s and 70s. And finally, it was Bob Brooks who spoke very strongly on my behalf when I applied for and got the job as Assistant Sports Information Director under George Wine in 1971 at the University of Iowa. Obviously, that was a game changer for me, and I remained in that office for 42 years. I'm not quite sure what direction my life would have taken had I not ended up with that job and with the help of Bob Brooks. Now, many people have heard me say this before. I have a personal Mount Rushmore. On that, I have my father, Andrew Haddy, who owned a small grocery store here in Cedar Rapids. Also on there, the best athletic director any university ever had at that time, and that's Bump Elliott. He's here tonight. Thank you, Bump. The best boss and friend anyone could ever have, George Wine. He's on that Mount Rushmore. And the fourth face on there is Bob Brooks. All 4 of those men that I have put on my personal Mount Rushmore were a combination of father, brother, friend, and mentor, and I can never say thank you or I love you enough to those 4. Now, that's the melancholy side of things. There's a few Bob Brooks stories that need to be told that could put a few smiles on your faces out there tonight. His signature tape recorder, I exaggerate, but it was almost the size of this podium up here. Believe it or not, at one time or another, that tape recorder was in vogue. In fact, the recorders were much bigger at some time. While he was doing an interview, many of you have heard this story, with Illinois basketball All-American D. Brown. Brown turned to him and said, "Hey man, is that a VCR?" Rob and I laughed many times at Bob sternly punching the buttons on that recorder, trying to get it to work. We were all on a bus headed for Evanston, Illinois, for an Iowa football game against Northwestern, obviously, when Bob dropped that oversized recorder. I think Susie remembers it, and it seemed like 100, but in fact it was only about 8 batteries came rolling out of that tape recorder, and the bus was slowing and going, and so the batteries were rolling up and down the bus, and everybody, it was laughing, and yes, we did. Rob and I and everybody laughed, but it was not out of ridicule, it was out of the love and respect we had for Bob Brooks. There was the time in the 1970s when Bob was broadcasting an NCAA basketball title game. You see, back then, any station could do it if you paid the rights fee, and the rights fee wasn't that much at that time. UCLA had just won another title under John Wooden, and Dick Enberg was on the floor for the post-game interview with John Wooden. Only problem was, a sportscaster from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, had jumped over the press table with his live mic and grabbed John Wooden by the arm and started doing an interview with him ahead of every national journalist. Everyone on TV was wondering, who is this guy doing an interview with John Wooden while Dick Enberg is waiting to do the interview for the national TV? Of course, it was our Bob Brooks. Now, Bob was very famous. I'm surprised I haven't heard this tonight, for his love of a good CC Manhattan with just a slight touch of vermouth. If he saw the waiter or bartender bringing him a drink with too much vermouth, and usually it was too dark, he'd be walking towards him. Bob would, no, he'd wave him off saying, too dark, too much vermouth. Eventually, they started bringing him his drink with the vermouth on the side. You see, they went through a whole half a bottle of CC, of the Canadian Club, trying to get his drink correctly. But he did love that. In his later years, he was in the hospital at one time, and the doctor said, "Bob, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you're going to have to give up alcohol." "Well, Doc, if you don't mind, I'm going to get a second opinion." That's a true story. We're at Illinois for a football game on a Saturday morning. The game started at 2:30, so, people are a little late getting there for breakfast. Bob gets into the restaurant at this Holiday Inn or something in Champaign, and he walks in and he says, "I'd like to order a little breakfast." "I'm sorry, sir, we stopped serving breakfast about 15 minutes ago." "Well, can you check with the cook and just see if he can throw me on 2 eggs? See, nobody could say no to Bob because he was like royalty. He had the white hair, he always had the suit on and the tie. "Well, I'll see." Yes, he came back. He says, "We can make that for you. We'll put 2 eggs on for you." About 30 seconds later, he called. "Say, as long as he's putting those 2 eggs on, could you have him just throw on 2 strips of bacon?" Came back. "Yes, we can do that." Well, he's putting on all of that. He called him back. "Can you just have him throw on a few hash browns?" Before he got done, he had a whole buffet of breakfast in front of him. Outside of that, no one else could order any breakfast. Bob really enjoyed telling the story of Iowa's first Rose Bowl. They went there, and we may have a few small kids out there, but our faculty representative, this was 1956, was Bob Ray, not the governor, but he was our faculty rep, Bob Ray. His wife is Dottie Ray in Iowa City, who's still on the radio. Well, Mr. Ray spent about a minute telling Rose Bowl officials why the university president, Virgil Hancher, could not be at this particular event, and he was going into this, and go on that, and Bob was standing there. Finally, Bob interrupted him and he said, "Excuse me, but back in Iowa, we call that BS." He used the full word, though. Back then, he says, that's not the real reason. He just doesn't want to be here. So anyway, Bob was a sportscaster. He was a friend of Cedar Rapids and Iowa athletics for over 70 years. You can imagine the stories being told now in heaven since Bob arrived. There's George Wine, Jim Zaubel, Gene Clausen, Gus Schrader, Al Grady, Tate Cummins, Blaine Calkins, Bob Brown, all of those great people. Wow, what a group that is. And many of us were lucky enough to enjoy all of those giants when they were alive. I'm indeed blessed to have known and worked with all of those wonderful journalists, and Bob was right at the top of the list. Bob kept you up to date on the Hawkeyes, whether their team was 0-11 or 12-0, and he did it in the same professional manner. Coach Kirk Ferentz and some Hawkeyes are still in Chicago for the Big Ten kickoff luncheon activities. That's something that I'm sure everybody there sorely missed Bob, because he never missed it. I still, right now, think about it and have a hard time imagining Iowa Football Media Day without Bob and his safari hat. That's going to be something we're really going to miss. Even harder to imagine, as Gary and Rob has said, the thought of his not being in Kinnick Stadium for football games, or being there for basketball games, or even more so right here in this Colonel baseball field for Bob Brooks to be here, because they're here now in large part for what he's done through the years. We all say a lot about Bob's career and what he did for Cedar Rapids and those around him. The most important thing I think that needs to be said about Bob is that he was a man we loved, a man we'll miss, a man we'll remember, and most importantly, a good human being by anyone's standards. This is about Bob, and I must pass on, and I think they know this, my love and sympathies to Susie, Rob, and his family, and to the daughter they lost 27 years ago, Jane. She would love it, because she's with her dad right now. right now. And finally, Bob, a tip of the fedora, as they say, to you for a life well lived. We'll miss you so much, and as Bob would say to wrap it up, those are today's highlights in the world of sports. Thank you.
This is a tough crowd to follow for someone that Bob called one of the Cipher Boys. On behalf of the Cedar Rapids Baseball Club Board of Directors and the Colonel staff, I want to thank you all for being here today to honor and celebrate the life of a man that was and always will be near and dear to our organization. And we are gratified that Susie and Rob chose to have this celebration at our ballpark. There were several other obvious locations that would have been fitting for a gathering of Bob's friends: Kinnick Stadium, Carver Hawkeye Arena, or Kingston Stadium, just to name a few. But Veterans Memorial Stadium and the Cedar Rapids Ball Club, with their 80-year history with the Brooks family, seemed perfectly fitting for me. Starting with Bob's father, Ira, through and including Rob's time on our board, the Brooks family has amassed a total of 103 years of service to our board of directors, topped by Bob's 51 years as a director. An amazing amount of time and service to baseball in Cedar Rapids. Ira and Bob have both been elected to our Hall of Fame. Ira was inducted in 2008, and the following is from Ira's induction. Ira Brooks served over 30 years on the board of directors for Cedar Rapids Baseball. He was a board member during the Great Depression, when the team had to literally go door to door to keep professional baseball in Cedar Rapids. He worked closely with General Manager Judge Harry Johnson and was instrumental in working with Cy Slapnicka, the General Manager of the Cleveland Indians, to bring a working agreement to Cedar Rapids, which delivered some of Cedar Rapids' finest teams ever. One of the key movers to get the first Veterans Memorial Stadium built in 1949, He served as vice president during his tenure. The following is brief from Bob's induction ceremony. A broadcasting icon in Cedar Rapids, Brooks has been a member of the Cedar Rapids Baseball Club Board of Directors since 1965, continuing a legacy begun by his father Ira in 1935. The legacy continues with Bob's son Rob. Bob was the radio voice of the Cedar Rapids Baseball from 1949 to 1962, traveling with the team from 1949 through 1958. Bob was the play-by-play man for the first televised game at Old Veterans Memorial Stadium at the end of the 1958 season, and he handled color duties during the August 2001 final telecast from the old stadium. My father introduced me to Bob in 1964 at one of my brother's basketball games. I remember that day as if it was yesterday. Being the fourth of 5 boys who were all active in high school sports, like several have mentioned today, I couldn't wait until the day I was summoned to talk with Mr. Brooks after one of my games. I still have a cassette tape from 1972 of Bob broadcasting one of our American Legion regional baseball games from Hastings, Nebraska. Amazing. Hastings, Nebraska, he showed up anywhere. I've had the great fortune of calling Susie and Bob my good friends. From a boy playing ball games, through these years as an attorney, and as my time as president of the ball club, their kindness and thoughtful encouragement will always mean the world to me. Thank you.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesty above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Everyone join me. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesty above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
For coming. I want to especially thank everybody up here that took their time out and had such kind words to say. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much. Great stories, a lot of fun, and hope to all see you soon. Thank you again for coming out.